All right, everybody, welcome back. This is the end of the world. Michael and Stu.
I'm Michael.
And I'm Stu, and today we are talking about Ridley Scott's 1982 masterpiece. That's right, it is Blade Runner. Finally, we are entering the cinematic adaptation of Philip K. Dick novel O Sphere, as was inevitable with a podcast dealing with the end of the world.
Surprising, in retrospect, that Blade Runner was not covered earlier, but
surprising, but also possibly for the best.
Joyfully so, yes.
I mean, eventually, I guess we'll have to come back and do Blade Runner 2049. And
yeah, I guess on the one hand, I hope not. On the other hand, it suggests that the podcast will have been going on for a very long time.
Before we get into all of that, however, we should discuss this random power outage that has turned darkness, unleashed darkness on the Iberian Peninsula and even parts of France. Is this the case? What you were kind of looking into this for us, Michael. What are authorities saying about this?
Well, the more interesting thing that's being said. So again, the basic background is massive blackout that impacts millions of people in what's called a snap blackout. So it just like instant and everywhere. And the classic sort of apocalyptic shots that we have burned into our brain through all the media we consume about the end of the world. It very much feels like the beginning of Leftovers was just on my algorithm today. People scrambling around grocery stores and trying to get through subway tunnels, all that good stuff. Oh, right,
because like the trains stop between routes and stuff.
Yeah, so those people were pretty bad off. Obviously, people in hospitals, people blah blah blah. No real reports of the sort of damage and human cost of the thing, but I'm sure that's coming. But again, just like go on the phone, the traffic jams in downtown Madrid. I mean, it's
right because all the stoplights are
everything. Yeah. So it's just you're just driving. I mean, then the funny ones too, like Coco Gauff had just won a tennis match, and with those the drivel of those post game interviews in tennis, which are sort of unique.
How are you to overcome the the forearm of the forehand of your opponent?
It's also like tennis. We don't need to talk too much about post match tennis interviews, but I watched this a couple times today, because Coco Gauff was giving an interview when the power went out, and they do this weird thing where it's like it's like more human and informal, the interviews, the tennis
than like the post NBA.
Yeah, it's kind of like, hey Coco,
Jalen, how did you guys ride that wave to defeat the Pacers or whatever?
That's right. So it's weird stuff. Like the question she was asked was like, what a performance. What did you eat for breakfast today? He's like answering it like obviously.
She's like kale salad with walnuts.
Explain. No, she's like had to think. She's like avocado toast and fruit. But I didn't sleep well last night, so maybe I need to not sleep as well. And then she just kind of like stepped back because the microphone stopped working. And then she was like, you could see her be like, oh, is it not working? And then she like snapped again because realizing like, now the match was in the day, so if you watch the video, it's not like this dramatic.
They're like, are they outside? Like,
yeah, it's outside, so but you can see people like reacting to you.
Is this the French Open? No, right?
No, it's. I mean, it's. I think it's probably
in Spain. Why would it be the French Open?
Because they do the French Open. This is the clay court season, so I think this might be.
That's why I'm thinking of French Open.
Yeah, because Madrid's the big one before the French, so I think that's probably right. But, yeah. So obviously not a great thing, but also perfect for the podcast in terms of the usual over reliance on these centralized, modes and issuers of convenience and what happens when they go. And so, we talked about this a bit in it. What came to mind was that a movie that we did recently, Train to Busan.
Yeah.
Where the guy is being held up at checkpoint at the beginning of the movie. And obviously something terrible is happening. And it was some sort of maybe a quarantine situation or whatever. And the first thing he says is like, well, you can't, you're not going to kill my livestock again. Like I can't afford it or whatever, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
talk about how this always comes down in a hyper individualized society, and not just the fault of individuals, but the fact that we live in one
The
and in a
system. Yeah.
um, and that was happening today. So like there's people like Mariana Guzman, an employee at an ice cream shop and cafe in the city center, said the business would stand to lose dozens of vats of ice cream if the power didn't return within the next hour. Standing over the counter, she told Euronews, "We're just waiting to see what will happen because realistically, if it doesn't return by then, we'll have a big loss. They'll start to melt, and once that happens, it's very dangerous to refreeze them, and it's already been more than an hour. The street is closed, and businesses are concerned because you could stand to lose a lot." And
Yep.
I just, again, my fascination with these types of examples. That again, no shade or ill will to people who are in those situations, but um, it's when something like that happens when I'm involved in, any type of thing goes wrong. It's maybe because of my own paranoia and anxiety. Like it's the least surprising thing ever to me, as opposed to like, wow, we just really didn't see this coming. And it's like, I don't know. I mean, I guess you don't see it coming, but once it's come, you can see why it came.
Right, right.
So then the question, Stu, is how did it come? And the jury's still out a little bit.
Was it
But,
terrorism?
well, of course you're going to get everything, right? You're going to get, if you go online, you'll get a lot of thoughts. But the one of the more let's say standard responses, and probably the thing that actually happened, it just says the cause was actually a failure of the interconnection between the grids
Yeah.
because they are all connected between these countries. Um, but then there was another one that I saw. It was this is BBC.com report, so it's not we're not like following the Twitter feed of like 5G anti anti 5G patriot or
It's
whatever.
not Naomi Wolf's
Yeah, right.
read on
But
the situation.
I don't know if you saw this, but it says preliminary reports out of Europe about the massive blackout that left millions powerless say the cause may have been something called induced atmospheric vibration, a rare phenomenon where weather changes affect power lines. Are you familiar with induced atmospheric vibrations, too?
For once, I must say I am not.
Yes.
I
Okay.
am
Tables have
not.
turned.
You got me, Michael.
Um, but yeah, basically, the explanation is that this is what led to the entire electricity grid being cut off. Um, and the suggestion was made by a Portuguese energy company, which does raise some alarm bells. It's like, well, yeah, who's not going to want to be blamed for the loss of energy? The energy company. Like you can see that the classic guy pulling on the collar of his
He's like,
shirt.
no, this is this rare atmospheric.
We gotta get to the bottom of this.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
someone in the boardroom's like, how the fuck are we gonna get out of this? Like, why don't we just blame climate change? And turns out that is the explanation. It said due to extreme temperature variations in the interior of Spain, there were anomalous oscillations in the very high voltage lines, a phenomenon known as induced atmospheric vibration. So it may just be another day to go to battle between whether climate change does anything bad or whether it's all made up. So I'm very excited to hop back online after this.
Yeah, yeah, I'm sure that there'll be a positive. Another thing that sometimes causes stuff like this is sunspots, right? Or like there are solar storms that can have odd effects on
Oh, really?
the Earth's magnetosphere that can lead to problems with machinery and stuff like that. Quite rare, but something I've seen hypothesized about.
There's also been some stuff obviously on the other side of the where it's like the reason it might be taking longer than usual to bring it back up is it's hard to bring non-renewables back on board. So people are once again ringing that alarm bell that non-renewables can't be trusted in serious
Wait,
situations.
you mean renewables?
Oh, sorry, yeah, renewables.
So
The
like
bad,
the solar panels
yeah,
aren't
sorry, the opposite, the bad one in the eyes of.
people who are evil.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, so not a great situation. And we've got a lot of could this happen here articles coming.
No, never.
Far too exceptional a place to be felled by something as petty as um induced atmospheric vibration. What? It's hot and cold. Give me a break.
Yeah. Well, that is interesting, and in a way, it leads in nicely to our conversation about Blade Runner, because the world of Blade Runner, this is one of the great things, and we'll be getting into more and more of this as time continues to move forward. But this is a futuristic dystopia that, from our vantage point, is set in the past, right?
Mhm.
The film came out in 1982, directed by Ridley Scott, as I said at the top. It's an adaptation of, a kind of a loose adaptation of Philip K. Dick's novel, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, which itself came out, I believe, in 1967 or 68.
Which
And,
explains a little better why the year, because I guess they kept the same time frame, right?
well, no, because in the Dick novel, it's set in 1991.
Oh, I didn't know.
Yeah.
He was just trying to keep the time somewhat consistent,
Yeah, well,
which is
they pushed it a little further, but in
still only it's only what 37 years.
well, it was written in 68, and no, like 25 years.
Right. So Dick really thought things were going to fall
Well,
apart for
in
him.
the novel, it's not as, I would say, because you don't see what the world looks like,
Mhm.
um, it's not as obvious that the world
Right.
is much more advanced.
But
That
Ridley Scott in 1982 is definitely
was like,
painting
well, we got to push it to like 40 years, right?
but that's still pretty fast for
Well,
the.
I mean, one of the things that doesn't really get discussed in the movie, and there, I mean, I think we both had a lot of problems with this movie, despite its status as being a masterpiece, as I, of course, declared it at the opening, as I have a tendency to declare everything we cover a masterpiece. I don't know if you've picked up on that just yet. But there was a nuclear war. The reason people are moving to other planets, and the reason all the animals are dead and people have robot animals instead of real animals, like, of course, the snake isn't real. I can't afford a real snake. That's one line that comes up in the film, is because most species have gone extinct. And people have left the Earth because the whole Earth is irradiated.
Yep.
So that doesn't really ever get addressed. This is a very funny movie where there are moments of absurd plot exegesis. Like towards the beginning, when Deckard, so our main character is Rick Deckard, who is played by Harrison Ford, and he is a Blade Runner, a term invented for the movie, a term that does not appear in the novel. And what he does is he hunts renegade androids, right? Another thing that is not explained in the movie at all is like, why are there these these androids that are these humanoid androids that are outwardly indistinguishable from
Right. Why don't
normal?
you just explain quickly?
Yeah, I mean, we're not going to go into the novel because
Yeah.
we're actually going to do an episode on the novel
Yes.
sometime in the next couple months, but it you need to touch on it a little bit, I think, just to give some more context
Yep.
to what's going on in the movie. And in fact, this very issue has plagued this movie since inception, right? This is a movie for which there exists 7 different cuts. Like there's like the original theatrical cut, then there's like a slightly longer TV cut, a home video cut, then there's a director's cut, then there's like an interpolated cut bringing that, and then sometime in the last 15, 20 years, Scott went back and did like the final cut,
Which is what we
which is
watched.
what we watched.
And the fact that this was the final cut was particularly disturbing.
Somewhat irksome.
Yeah,
Well,
although, briefly I would say there was also it took a long time to develop it, and there were multiple people who had optioned it, and even Scorsese was like interested in doing it, but and the first time he actually had it optioned, Dick, was this producer Herb Jaffe, and apparently Dick was so upset with the screenplay that was written by the producer's son. And the quote is, "The screenplay was so terribly done. Robert flew down to Santa Ana to speak with me about the project. And the first thing I said to him when he got off the plane was, 'Shall I beat you up here at the airport or shall I beat you up back at my apartment?'"
I
Which is
mean,
like, it's a pretty good example. You're saying the book is pretty brilliant. And, having these guys, these like geniuses like Philip K. Dick, like watch as, sci-fi movies become more and more popular and make more and more money, and then watch their work be like run through that Hollywood system must be
yeah,
cool.
yeah. Well, I think Dick, mercifully for him, actually died before this movie came out, and also before a lot of the later
At least he never lived to see Blade Runner.
Well, because by this point, so many of his projects have been turned into movies. I mean, we were talking about something we should cover in the future, The Man from the High Castle, which was kind of his breakthrough hit in the early 60s.
Mhm.
Then
I
there's,
guess there was an Amazon thing called Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep that was like a mini series
oh, really? That's
that had a bunch.
probably a straighter adaptation.
Yeah,
Amazon must have made a deal with the Dick Estate or what have you.
yeah, it's kind of, well, it's more like a Black Mirror type
Yeah,
thing.
yeah. Yeah. Oh no, I think it's Electric Dreams is what you're thinking of,
Oh, right, yeah,
which
yeah,
is an anthology series that adapts his short fiction.
that's right.
He also, he did Minority Report. What's that other one called? Scanner Darkly. Like a lot of these things that are just
I
kind
like
of,
Gary.
yeah. I don't like Minority Report, but we'll eventually have to cover it. I mean, I'll probably read the novel for that too and probably like it more. In any case, the novel is very different. The novel has this, the movie is kind of cuts in about 35, 40 pages into the novel
Hmm.
and then cuts out the last chunk of the novel as well and really hones in on the noir aspect, right? Because clearly the film has a structure of a kind of film noir.
Yeah.
Visually, it's very dark, chiaroscuro lighting. You're seeing the seamy underbelly of this horrible city.
Yeah.
like,
Like in just all of these like small, somewhat inconsequential, like it's him getting like dinner at a street cart, right?
Exactly. And there's Japanese culture is like hegemonic in
Yeah.
San Francisco, which I assume is where the novel set. I'm assuming that's where we are in the movie as well. I don't know if that even explicitly is stated.
Mhm.
Um, there's the classic early 80s Japanese American anxiety about Japan, right?
Yeah.
Which seems quite quaint and racist from 2025. We also see the only two big brands that we remember well have survived. One is good call, Coca-Cola, right? Although we see the classic '80s Coca-Cola logo being
Yeah.
flown by on blimps and things.
And it's there's all types of ads, but the ones that are from the world are as we as was being lived in 1982 is Coca-Cola and Pan Am.
Yep.
One for two. I like the idea of Ridley Scott just being like, okay,
what's going to survive?
what is unsinkable? Pan Am.
which famously did not survive the decade of the 1980s. But
I don't even think it got through the 80s, right?
no, it didn't. It did not. Yeah. Once a brand like Coca-Cola is synonymous with luxury and American excellence, but perhaps like America itself,
Yes.
fell on hard times. But in any case, the noir plot is basically Deckard is this guy. He's a Blade Runner. Blade Runners are bounty hunters who are hired by the police to hunt down these androids who have escaped from off-world colonies. As I said, the reason people have moved off-world to places like Mars, the moon, is because they're not irradiated, right? And these robots, these androids, are created as companions, as slaves, as servants that help these people who are existing in this new off-world existence. Right. Many humans who can afford to have gone. The ones that remain either have remained because of some ideological reason or because they have nothing to live for, kind of. Well, when we meet Deckard's boss, right, who's I think his name is Baff or something, he gives this heavily like plot exegesis speech where he's like, yeah, the replicants, they only live 4 years and they go blah blah blah, and this new model.
The Blade Runner wouldn't already know.
That's the thing that bothered me. I was like, what? This is this guy's job. Like, why are you explaining this to him? It's so the exegesis is just so heavy-handed. Mm-hmm. In the original cut of the film, the producers hated something probably closer to the version we watched, and so insisted that Harrison Ford be brought in and do all this voiceover, kind of like a noir detective, being like, well, I flew down to the old blah 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 neighborhood to check up on a lead.
Yours ain't what it used to be.
Right. And when you hear
make a
it,
good noodle.
yeah, when you hear the Harrison Ford um, voiceover, it's so obvious how checked out he was. It's just like Harrison Ford, the ultimate just like checked out guy. Like does not care, makes a lot of money, is good, get me off the
Right.
set, crashes his plane, right?
We're gonna need you to come in, do some voiceover, and he just knows that that means the cut is so bad.
Yeah, exactly. Um,
There's only one fucking way that they're getting me through that door, and that's if the movie is terrible.
so the movie is very visually interesting,
Mhm.
and that is the best part of the movie. Just like
Yeah,
looking
and
at the
I
world.
would guess, especially for 1982,
Oh yeah, like
pretty
really, really.
pretty unbelievable how it looks. Yeah.
And that said, the plot is really difficult to care about any of the stuff that's going on.
Yeah. So basically, what the replicants have been made illegal,
Well,
right?
they're not allowed to come to Earth.
That's what I mean. They're not allowed to come to Earth because there have been some problems. There have been some mutinous replicants. Um, but we come to find out, right, that a handful of them have returned for
Right.
reasons unclear, right?
In the novel, it's 6. In the movie, they cut it down to 4. 2 of them were killed in some earlier skirmish, just
Yeah.
for the sake of plot. It's easier to kill 4 than it is 6, right? And the only way to tell the replicants, to identify them, is by administering this test called the Voight-Kampff test, which is named after 2 scientists in this world who figured out that a certain circuit in their brain, they lack a certain element of human empathy. And we see Deckard and
Just like before you get into that, I just want to say, like, that to me just is when this was the beginning of the movie where there was one of these tests going on. Yeah, I was lost right away. It's like, so you invent these things, and surely you have some awareness that would be important to distinguish between replicant and human. And what they've come up with is a test of the strangest questions you ever heard, and you check if the guy's blinking or if his pupil moves.
yeah.
Like, what? Check the tag on the back. What the hell are you talking? What?
Well, what we come to see, and this is true in the novel as well, is that the company in the movie they're called the Tyrell Company. In the novel, they're the Rosen Company. And part of me wonders if that name was changed to Tyrell, a very Irish name, to avoid accusations of anti-Semitism. Right? Not that I think Dick was being anti-Semitic by having the Rosens be the creators, but it is odd that they moved that name to Tyrell. In any case, the Tyrell Company like wants to make the replicants real. Like they don't. They're like ideologically committed. Their motto is more human than human.
It's a good motto.
Yeah. Which is where presumably that song "More Human Than Human" comes from. I hadn't thought of that.
Mm-hmm.
In any case, we see Deckard exploring this world. He goes to an apartment that was associated.
He's been tasked to kill them.
He's got to kill them. That's his job. There's 4 of them out there. He goes to this company, the Tyrell Company, to run the test on one of the few replicants that's allowed to be on Earth. And that is this character, Rachel, who doesn't know she is a replicant or has suspicions but isn't really sure. And her creator, Mr. Tyrell, is the Loris Tyrell. No. He is the ideologue about whom I was just speaking, right? And he gets there. There's like robotic owl. All of this stuff is from the novel, but in the novel, its presence makes so much more sense. So watching this, having just read the novel, I was like, okay, like
in the movie, it's just like window dressing.
Exactly. It's just you see him at one point at an animal dealer. There's like an ostrich that goes by, and the ostrich is like a big part of the novel. I was like, oh, there's the ostrich, and then that's it. It's just walk by. It's like, all right, there's the ostrich. Okay. Um, we watched the Rachel get this test, and the questions are um really. Also, she smokes, which is funny. It's like,
There's so much smoking in this movie.
yeah, like everyone's just
I love
smoking.
it. It's like all this stuff has happened, but
They,
somewhere
they have
still,
replicants, no vape technology,
yeah,
however. No one zins. There's no one's putting a zin
yeah.
in.
It is that is a very good point.
Yeah.
There are funny uses of analog and old world stuff that somehow stuck around despite all these huge changes.
Yeah. The questions he asks her to try and elicit this response that will be a tell that she's an android are: someone gives you a cat skin wallet, like a wallet made of the skin of a cat. She's like, I don't want it. I'm not interested. A boy shows you his butterfly collection and his killing jar, like the jar where he kills them. And she's like, I take him to the doctor. She asks all these questions. Finally, she gets caught up on a question about a boiled dog being on a menu.
Being served at a party or something.
Yeah, there's a entree of boiled dog is offered. She doesn't react to that. She's just like, yeah. And he's like, all right, well,
That's not human to
yeah.
like dog. Good thing we've got this really, really like fail-safe test to determine whether you're a replicant or a human.
Oh, you weren't horrified enough at the idea of eating dog? Yeah.
Your pupils didn't dilate?
Uh, and then, so she leaves and he talks with the creator and he's like, Deckard's like, how can
He gives up the game right away. I guess he's not trying to hide it really. He's just like, maybe you, a former Blade Runner, may not have heard, but we've got a new model that thinks it's actually human.
And
Also,
he's
just
like, how can it not know what it is? And that's when he says more human than human is our model. And she's an experiment. Rachel is an experiment, nothing more. And the way they've created this new model is to preload them with false memories and to provide them with the accoutrements that seem to confirm these memories. And we see this throughout the film in the form of photos. So Rachel herself has photos that are
like Polaroids.
Yeah, they're old. Yeah. They're like tintypes in some cases.
He's like in the scene where he's like trying to figure out a situation, and he's got all this technology that allows him to like zoom in on photos and enhance. And then he's like, "Get me a hard copy." And he presses the button, and a Polaroid comes out.
Yeah. Well, that's one thing, right? They have this sort of CSI enhanced photo tech, in a way that unfortunately we do not. I mean, try blowing up a JPEG. You're like, what is that blob?
Right. Did not get there by 2019. I'll tell you that.
Ridley. And we have these AI photo enhancers. Have you ever tried one of those? Try to clean. It doesn't work, man. It just it's horrifying. That's something we need to get our best minds on immediately. But the idea here is that basically you can trick a creature, a machine, into believing itself to be human by giving it the essential human capacity for memory. This ties back into my old obsession of cybernetics, right? And that the thing that unites complex machines and humans is precisely the ability to refer back to memories. Yeah. And what this presupposes is that memory is just a form of data that can be inserted into a brain and doesn't have to actually derive from lived experience, right? Such that like an android could be loaded up with your backlog of experiences and essentially approximate you pretty accurately in theory. There were some way to transfer human memory into robot form. So we learn that this is a new breed, and the most dangerous of the androids that's out there is this guy Roy Batty, who's played by Rutger Hauer, who looks amazing in this movie. This is like the other really good part about the movie is Rutger Hauer's performance.
Yes,
Harrison Ford is fine. Sean Young is fine. I mean, she plays Rachel. She's good. Even Daryl Hannah, whatever, she's fine. But Rutger Hauer really kind of rises above because Roy Batty is this Nexus 6 model who's obsessed with poetry. Everything that he says in the film is like kind of this twist. He has almost a twisted Mad Hatter sensibility at moments. And they're engaged in some kind of a quest to prolong their life because one of the problems they face is that they all have a terminal lifespan of 4 years. Like after 4 years, their battery will wear down. They will die. That's it. And so the first thing we see is they're torturing this artificial eye maker, right? Because they're trying to find a way into the Tyrell Corporation, and this guy makes eyes for them. He and Leon, who's the other replicant we saw being interviewed earlier, and they're eventually led to this guy J.F. Sebastian, who is a character in the novel, but in the film is a kind of Dr. Frankenstein figure, right?
Who somehow manages to really not be interesting at all.
Right. Well, in the novel, he's radioactive. He has radioactive brain damage, so is like depicted as simple-minded as a result of radiation exposure. And they kind of kept that aspect of his character because he seems sort of like a gullible dupe. But they add in this story that he's also like this genetic genius who's built these, he has like little people, androids that are running around his apartment dressed as Napoleon. And there's this kind of menagerie of synthetic life that fills up his otherwise empty apartment. And he's seduced by Pris, who's one of the other androids, the Daryl Hannah android. In any case, they're going to use Sebastian as a way to get to Tyrell because he works for Tyrell, essentially. And meanwhile, Deckard traces a fish scale he finds as the photo in hand sequence, and they find there is actually a serial number on the fish scale. It's not a fish scale, it turns out it's actually a snake scale, but finds it. What's that?
And of course, it's not a real snake.
No. It is an artificial snake. He traces that to the dealer. He finds the woman who's using the artificial snake in her erotic cabaret act, confronts her, she tries to kill him. Here's the funny thing, like the androids are much stronger than humans, but they consistently fail to kill Deckard, despite having many...
Really no good reason for it.
I mean, there's the Daryl Hannah robot later gets her legs around his neck and is choking him out.
That's like the biggest break in the reality of it. It's like, don't they have like superhuman strength? Why can't she just crush his neck?
I don't know. I mean, again, there are problems with this movie. Eventually, he chases her down. He does this weird David Lynch impression where he's like, "I'm with the Bureau to check out on your..."
He changes his voice.
Right. That's what I mean by David Lynch. He sounds like David Lynch. Like, really.
Oh, yeah.
Like,
that's
he's
right.
like, "Hey, it's me. I'm here to blah, blah." And it's just like, hey, what on earth
It's sort of unbearable to watch, and then, like, he kind of can't even, like, hang through the scene.
He can't keep the facade up. His voice goes back to normal by the end.
Right. Sort of like Richard Gere in First Night. Do you remember this?
Does he have like a British accent at first?
No, he classically, it's like him and, is it Costner in Prince of Thieves, where they're both in these movies. Everyone's has an English accent, and they just like, fuck it, he can't do it. And you're still in it because you're Richard Gere. But he just has an American accent as like an Arthurian knight. It's amazing.
That rules.
Not First Night. That's the Heath Ledger.
That's movie. What I was thinking. The Heath Ledger with the Vision plays Chaucer, one of my beloved movies of college. Anyway,
it is First Night.
Oh, it is. Yeah. Okay, so he kills the erotic dancer robot. Then he tracks down Rachel, who has also run and has been added to the list of androids he must retire to a permanent end.
Even though he just might like her.
He's kind of into her. And we see a scene where as he's trying to kill Rachel, Leon, the initial replicant he was chasing, catches him off guard and is like on the verge of gouging out his eyes and just killing him. When for unknown reasons, Rachel shoots Leon. She kills her fellow android to help Deckard. Yeah. And then Deckard goes back to his house with Rachel. And what we see is that Deckard's house is also filled with photos and the exact same accoutrements that the replicants have to indicate their past. We come to see that, like, oh, all the things that we humans use, these replicants use, and that brings up the question that is, the main debate about this movie is like, is Deckard a replicant, right?
Yes.
Because it's certainly strongly implied, and depending on what cut you watch, there's that moment when he has the dream about the unicorn.
Mhm.
Um, that really seems to be leaning into, oh yeah, he is a replicant, right?
Yeah.
But other people say no.
I think that creating that
Ambiguity.
ability and ambiguity was probably just a cop out for the fact that there wasn't that interesting of a story going on. And in fact that like it that distinction and that question just never felt earned in any moment. And it's like you should only really have that if it's also a good story that I care about. And that's really where the whole thing sort of fell apart for me.
Yeah, I kind of tend to agree. I mean,
Oh wait, I don't even care if he's a replicant or not. Isn't that interesting?
usually when we're doing a movie, I watch it like a week before
Mhm.
we and take copious notes.
Yeah.
And this time, I've seen this movie many times.
Yes, me
Although
too.
I've seen many different versions of it, I now come to realize, because there were parts of this that there are parts that I remember from the movie that were just not in this watch through.
I mean, I know I've seen it a few times as a much younger.
I saw it in college at least twice.
I'd say the last time I saw it could have been as long as 20 years ago, but I had just filed it away in my head as like a great classic sci-fi.
And it
And
is visually.
it is visually, which I guess is probably where
The impression
most
lies.
people's love for it has to come from that.
Yeah.
I can't imagine that it would have been received similarly if that wasn't what was driving the praise.
I remember watching it once during a trip I took to Vermont with some friends in college, where we may have been indulging in some marijuana usage,
Oh,
something I have not
or
done
it was
for a long
legal.
time. And I just remember under that circumstances in college with some friends in Vermont, being slightly stoned, uh, incomprehensible. just
That's funny. I thought you were going to be like absolute piece of genius.
Well, no, but it felt good because of that lack
Yeah.
of understanding in a
Yeah.
way. Whereas now, in utter sobriety, I haven't used marijuana for years, and I don't, I was like, okay, and I just read the book, so I know exactly what the beats are. That it's, I was just like, what? I found it even more bewildering, almost.
This is still incomprehensible.
Well, it's incomprehensible in a different way. Like, why
Yeah.
were these choices made? Like,
Yeah.
and I think, well, we'll talk about it when we cover the book, I guess. But just to wrap up the plot, basically, he has this weird sort of forcible seduction of Rachel where she wants to leave and he's like, no. And I'm just kind of like, oh, this is assault. Like,
Come on, give it a try. I'm Harrison Ford.
yeah, like, what is this, okay? Is it okay to do this because she's a robot? Like, that doesn't feel like a good message. And he locks her up. He gets word over Roy Batty finds a way to Tyrell, murders him for not being able to extend his life, murders their helper, Sebastian, retreats to the apartment, informs Pris, we're the only two left. They got Leon, they got whatever. And Deckard learns that Sebastian was found with Tyrell. They've both been killed. Sebastian's address is just broadcast over the radio, and he's the only one who's like, oh, well, probably should go check that out, right? And he does. Lo and behold, he's confronted by Pris in the scene we already said. She does these flips at him like a deadly ninja gymnast.
Mm.
Seemingly could have killed him, but then runs back to do another row of flips, at which point he just draws a gun and shoots her. Classic Harrison Ford move when confronted by a overly dramatic opponent, one must say. And then he has this final fight with Batty, which is quite extended and sort of hard to understand what's even going on. He's shooting at him. Roy Batty's kind of teasing him. Eventually, for some unknown reason, he goes out onto the roof and is about to die. He falls and is hanging, and inexplicably, Batty appears above him holding a dove. Just great detail, right?
They're like, we've got to end this movie.
And Roy Batty saves him and then delivers, what is, I think, quite a beautiful speech that the movie is probably most famous for, where he says, "Quite an experience to live in fear, isn't it? That's what it is to be a slave." And then he's kind of breaking down and dying. He sits, Ford thinks he's going to kill him. They're sitting in the rain together, and he says, "I've seen things you people wouldn't believe. Attack ships on fire off the shoulder of Orion. I watched sea beams glitter in the dark near the Tannhauser Gate. All those moments will be lost in time, like tears in rain. Time to die." At which point he does, in fact, die. And right after Roy Batty dies, Deckard's boss appears and is like, "Good work, Deckard." It's just like,
And Deckard's like, I'm having a moment here,
I
okay?
think I'm done. I don't.
Yeah.
They're like, "Well, you got the job done." And he kind of goes back, you know, and he's like, "What happened to Rachel?" And he's like, "Huh." And the boss is like, "It's too bad she won't live. But then again, who does?" Which is this sort of final triumph of entropy moment where we're placed on the same level as these machines. We all have this inevitable end that we're faced with. Some have more time than others. Goes back to the apartment to find Rachel and reflect. Hears that line about, "Too bad she won't live again," and then the film just ends. I know there are other versions where we see him flee with her, where they.
And it just ends. It's funny because it doesn't end on a cut really. So like he hears it. It's like, it's too bad she won't live. But then again, who does? And then they just kind of like well, he sees the origami
The
little,
crane or the. Yeah.
and then he just kind of like goes through the door with her.
Yeah. And it's
But like
over.
it looks like it's going to be like a continuing shot.
Oh, yeah.
Then the movie's just over.
Very strange. So, as far as the end of the world goes, like, I think this movie obviously is set in a climate dystopia caused by nuclear war of some
Yeah.
kind. It is wrestling with what it means to be alive, whether robots or, if a sufficiently humanoid robot could, approximate life. It exists on that cybernetic spectrum that I've, invoked several times
Trying to
before.
do a little too much to take any particular thing and treat it seriously or well, I think.
I think that's right. And the funny thing is, the novel is not long. The novel's maybe 250 pages long. It's an
Mhm.
easy read, and yet the novel is there's so much stuff that does not even come up in this movie at all that's in the novel. There's this entire religious plot in the novel that is
Interesting.
contrasted. There's an android television host who is contrasted with a paid human actor who's been created a kind of latter-day Jesus figure. And there's this rivalry between religion and media that's examined in the
You
film.
just see some like studio execs like it's about Deckard. We only give a shit about Deckard. Give me Deckard. Give me more Deckard.
Right, except Harrison Ford's so laconic in the movie. It's
Oh
like, who
yeah.
cares? There's
Yeah, I mean the thing of interest is like you when you watch this movie now, I think that the fundamental experience in a positive way is when you go, wow, I pretty crazy this was made in 1982. That looks like a sci-fi now,
it looks
you know?
better than a sci-fi now
Well, yeah, but
because practically done.
right, but you know what I mean? Like there's this wholeness to the world and there's this like authenticity and grittiness in
yeah,
actual like the streets and the like I said, like the street carts and the actual like day-to-day movement that people have in this darkness. Um Also like while being feted with these monstrous advertisements. Advertising boards are just going to get bigger and they kind of combining those things in a way, it's like going around like the cyberpunk 2077 whatever
yeah, yeah,
video,
yeah, yeah.
right? 2277, I can't remember the year, but
No, it's 2077, and it's also right. It's like Times Square, but everywhere is Times Square,
yeah. And
right?
so you can get like you I was like very intrigued by what I was watching visually, but like frankly the story it's one of those where I just found myself kind of
No,
laughing.
it bites. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
And like
terrible.
it's like you said, like the Batty is the best, but it's almost like
We aren't given enough to
we
really
aren't. It's
relate
like
to him.
Batty. like the movie might be better if it was just Batty as the main character, and
Yeah.
you know, and the world he's describing in this moment sounds pretty interesting too. And again, just like if you're gonna do that much exposition,
It's got to pay off.
I just
Yeah.
really want to know why you didn't figure out a way to like identify replicants since you know were in control of making them. Um, oh, can I check the bottom of your foot? Oh, there you go. Thank you. Like
Yeah.
that's an R. That's an R that the replicant can't remove. That means replicant. Oh no, what if we do this whole thing so that it's so complicated that we end up questioning whether humans and androids are the same thing? Well, we can have that totally superficial philosophy 101 conversation, or I can just look at the bottom of your foot and we can move on.
Brutal but fair. All right, I think that's good for Blade Runner.
I think so.
We'll come back to this material in the form of the novel, which I do think is much more rewarding intellectually. But yeah, shocking to hate something that's so revered so much.
I mean, I'm not. It happens to me all the time.
Yeah, it does to me as well. Who am I kidding? Who am I kidding? I'm a hater at heart. All right, so next week we're going to take a look at possible supply chain nightmares that might result from this.
Supply chain.
We're talking supply chains. We're talking about the possible worst case scenarios that might come to pass because of the Trump tariff showdown with China, which is continuing to unfold. In the meantime, if you like the show, feel free to follow us on the podcatcher of your choice. And if you really like it, leave us a rating and or review on that podcatcher. You can also follow us on Instagram at The End of the World WMS. And so next week, supply chains. Until then, this has been The End of the World with Michael and Stu.
I'm Michael.
And I'm Stu, and we will talk to you real